All right. Coming at you all the way live from Oakland, California. This is Revolution. And this is the return of maybe one of my favorite intros. I'm not going to lie, I really like this intro. I just want to sit here. Well, no, I'm going to talk over it. So this episode, this show was a fun show. We hooked this show up with Tuesday evening foreign policy co-host Jean Bajlan. He says, I'm not going to try to do a Jean Bajlan impersonation because all my impersonations are very horrible. But anyway, Jean goes, hey, I think I can reach out to Daniel Bessner and get him on the show. And Pascal wasn't too familiar with Daniel Bessner. I'd known him just through seeing him on other people's shows as a bit of a foreign policy guy. But Daniel Bessner did the heavy lifting. He did what one of the patrons and frequent commenters in the chat said on Twitter, said Daniel Bessner reading Barack Obama's latest biography is reparations. So this episode, I wouldn't say was a fun one for Pascal, but we were coming off of just doing Ben Burgess' show, and Ben had hit me up about coming on his show to do something about the Derek Chauvin trial. And Pascal and I have very similar feelings about commenting on being a voice for all of Black America, right? Which generally happens in these episodes. And we had a feeling that Ben didn't want us to do that. He just kind of wanted to speak about it. And he's off right now. He's taking his break. And Pascal just was beautiful job. I will put a link in the description of the show to the Ben Burgess episode that we were on. I thought it was a very good episode. We tackled some tough topics. A lot of times I feel like when people do these kinds of shows, they just stay talking in a circle about injustice in what they think that is, which is always some sort of nicer way for police to keep doing the same thing that's causing people to get murdered. So we got a deep dive on Burgess' show. So Pascal was on a tear on the Burgess show. And also, side note, I do have to say this, I thought this was kind of funny. Right when the show was over, I logged off. I figured everybody had logged off. Usually when we do Burgess' show, he does not chit-chat after the show because it's late for him. So it's like, all right, show's over, bye. So show is over. I always type in thank you, and I logged off, and I went to call Pascal. I didn't realize that he had his screen still up, so they were actually listening to everything we were saying. But we weren't talking shit, which I thought was kind of funny. We were talking about something, and we hear Forrest, his producer, say, yeah, it took a little while for that thing to happen too, for da-da-da. And he had heard us, and we were just like cracking up, and we were like, well, aren't we glad we weren't talking shit? So that was fun. But anyway, so Jean Bajlan says I can get Daniel Bessner on. So we're coming off of this Burgess show appearance, which was a pretty good appearance for us, especially for Pascal. And Pascal, if you don't know, I've been putting links in the last few episodes in the description to his writing. So please go check that out. You can see a lot of his writing in Black Agenda Reports. Where to put the link for Black Agenda Report? I didn't put a link for the Huffington stuff he did and whatever else he wrote for. He's a popular guy. He's working on his book. And we try to give him pressure every so often. They're like, hey, you finished that book yet? How many chapters did you get today? And Barack Obama, for him, I wouldn't say this is his ballywick, but he definitely is not a fan. And he came up with the late Bruce Dixon of Black Agenda Report. And Bruce Dixon had worked with Obama back in the days in Chicago. So he definitely had a good, what's the word? what's the word I'm looking for? Dixon wasn't a fan. And I'm putting it extremely mildly. Sorry, as I record this, it's pretty late. This is like the one free time I have to do this while we get ready for a big show we have Saturday. And before I pitch the Saturday show, I just want to finish this. So, Bessner, who has read Obama's book, Pascal's just ready for the show. And not that Bessner was like a fan of Obama's book. He definitely, of course, had problems with Obama's book. But Pascal's understanding of not just the inner workings of black politics, but kind of how Barack Obama was, as he puts it, like created in a petri dish. So it was a very good episode. We stayed true to our hour. We could have went on for another couple. We did actually. If you are a patron, then you heard the patron bonus half, which was definitely a deeper dive into foreign policy during the Obama years, and foreign policy, Trump v. Biden, with Kuba and Jean Bajlan, guys who have actually worked overseas in think tanks. So, if you'd like to be a part of this show and you want to hear this stuff live time, then you have to subscribe to the YouTube, youtube.com/This Is Revolution Podcast. Simple as that. There's a link to the description of the show, wherever you're listening to it. Please, please, please subscribe to the YouTube. Be a part of these shows. It is a lot of fun. The chat is very active. We are very interactive with it. Also, if you have the means and you feel so inclined and you like to help the show grow, become a patron. We're taking baby steps into getting Pascal better Wi-Fi. You can't see it as you listen, but a lot of times his screen freezes. It's all fucked up because it always freezes when he's in the middle of a rant and his mouth is all open. It's fucked up. So we keep getting people saying, I'm going to become a patron just so Pascal can get a direct connection into the Wi-Fi. But he was able to get a Wi-Fi booster, so we'll see if that works. We have a big show this Saturday. So every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, every Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we do our live stream. Saturday, we call it the Saturday Crew, and that is myself, Pascal Robert, Marcus from the Left Flank Vets, Paul Prescott from Jacobin, and now the Green Party Vice Presidential candidate, Angela Walker, is a part of the Saturday Crew. She joins us on Saturday. So just fucking sign up to just for Saturday alone. Like, isn't that worth it? Norman Finkelstein is who's going to be our Saturday guest. But and when you hear this will be Sunday, so you will have missed that. Even more reason to go back to YouTube to watch the Saturday show. Because it's this what we call the free show. So we go much longer than an hour. We go sometimes 3 and up to 5 hours we've gone. Jen Pan from Jacobin was on. We went 5 hours. We actually had like other guests call. It was nuts. Anyway, I will be quiet now. Here is Daniel Bessner. Jean Bajlan joined us because it was a Foreign Policy Thursday. My co-host Pascal Robert. And we break down the mythology of Barack Obama. And I am out.
thank you very much. I would love just to sit here with these folks and listen, because you've got on this panel and in this room some of the most innovative, thoughtful policymakers, people who have both ideas but also ways of implementing them into action. And our country owes a great debt to a number of the people who are in this room because they helped put us on a pathway of prosperity that we're still enjoying, despite the best efforts of some. I want to thank Bob and Roger and Peter for inviting me to be here today. I wish I could be here longer. I'm going to have to run after a few minutes because we do have an important issue related to U.S.-India relations. But when Roger originally called to invite me not only to this forum but to invite me to engage in this project, I couldn't help but think that this was the sort of breath of fresh air that I think this town needs. We've all known for some time that the forces of globalization have changed the rules of the game. How we work, how we prosper, how we compete with the rest of the world. And we all know that the coming baby boom retirement will only add to the challenges that we face in this new era. Unfortunately, while the world has changed around us, Washington has been remarkably slow to adopt 21st century solutions for a 21st century economy. As so many of us have seen, both sides of the political spectrum have tended to cling to outdated policies and tired ideologies instead of coalescing around what actually works. For those on the left, and I include myself in that category, too many of us have been interested in defending programs the way they were written in 1938, believing that if we admit the need to modernize these programs to fit changing times, then the other side will use them to will use those acknowledgments to destroy them altogether. On the right, there's a tendency to push for massive tax cuts, as Peter indicated from my speech at Knox College, no matter what the cost or who the target is, a view that stems from the belief that there's no role for government whatsoever in the challenges we face. Of course, neither of these approaches really works, and before we came here, somebody was asking me, how do I maintain my idealism? I do because I think the American people know that neither of these approaches work. I think there is a broad consensus out there in the country that we should be looking for common sense, practical solutions to the problems that we face. I think that there is a market. I think that there is a demand for solutions that are practical, that are based on fact, and that are tested, and that require us to think in new ways. A lot of the people who are here today have done that in the administration. Not only have they succeeded on many of their policies, but almost just as importantly, they've failed occasionally and have acknowledged those failures and adjusted their views. And I think that's the kind of experimentation and attitude that all our policy making has to pursue. One thing that we all know is that when you invest in people, people will prosper. That when you invest in education and health care and benefits for working Americans, it pays dividends throughout every level of our.
All right. I think you guys have had enough of that video of Barack Obama speaking about investing in Americans and investing in people, speaking at a Brookings Institute function filled with the people that helped to break America. Hello, good evening. Hope a happy Thursday. It's starting off on a bit of a somber note, as right before I started the show, I saw an article that Shock G from Digital Underground passed away, and Digital Underground was a very, very, very large part of the studio that I lived in for so many years in West Oakland. And if you see me off camera for a while, it's because I'm getting blown up by people in the studio trying to figure out what's going on with that. But let me bring in my co-host, my homie, my dog. You may know him from the Ben Burgess Show. I know him as my favorite colored man in Miami, Pascal Robert.
Jason Miles, what's going on, comrade? I just want to say really quick, the video you showed comes from a piece that I wrote at Black Agenda Report called Barack Obama, Wall Street's Perfect Manchurian Candidate. Jason will put the link in the chat. And I want you guys to know the setting of that video was at the Brookings Institute at the launching of Robert Rubin, one of the most nefarious Secretary of Treasuries in the country, the man who basically forecasted and wrote the deregulation that led to the 2008 crash that Obama was praising as his wonderful brain, the launch of Robert Rubin's The Hamilton Project. So basically in that video, you see Barack Obama literally genuflecting, saying that we don't have to wed ourselves to these programs from 1938 like Social Security in front of the neoliberal financial elites that helped crash the economy. So we can go on from there. Check out that piece, Barack Obama, Wall Street's Perfect Manchurian Candidate.
I'll definitely be linking that. There's also links to more of your writings in the description of this show, wherever you're watching it. I also like to bring in another special co-host. It is Thursday, so on Thursday we bring in our foreign policy homies. And one of these foreign policy homies, you may know him from his numerous appearances on shows like The Majority Report, The Michael Brooks Show, and I don't know what other shows he's been on. He's been on a lot of shows. He's a professor, he's a writer, and he's someone that I call a friend. But you know him as Mean Gene Bajlan.
Good evening, everybody. I hope everyone's doing fine this wonderful Thursday night. Ready for a Foreign Policy Thursday?
Foreign Policy Thursday. So
we're going to talk about a variety of things.
We have to bring in, so we have a special guest for this evening. Mean Gene Bajlan said, hey, I have a friend. He wrote a few books. He's got an interesting take on foreign policy. I think he'd be great on the show. You may know him also from shows like The Majority Report, The Michael Brooks Show. Wait, is Bessner been on The Majority Report?
I think he has been. Yeah.
I think he has been. Yeah, he said he has been. So coming all the way live from Southern California, Daniel Bessner.
Oh, we lost audio.
Oh, did you mute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Now we can.
Yeah.
All right. Very happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm stoked. As they say in SoCal.
Thank you so much for coming through. That Pascal hits me up. So usually we try to start the show with a clip. Pascal hits me up and he says, I want you to play this. And rarely does he do this. He goes, I want you to play this clip. And just the tone of the message that I got, I knew that if I didn't play it, I was going to get it. And it's a good clip. I think it definitely sets up who Barack Obama really was. A lot of people in the chat were talking about how disappointed they were because we were all a little younger in 2008. And we were all very hopeful that this was going to be the hope and change president. He was finally a colored guy, and that was supposed to be a whole bunch of stuff, and it didn't work out very well for the American people. And so Daniel Bessner did the heavy lifting of reading Barack Obama's latest autobiography. And Pascal has a few questions for you about that.
Of course.
Yeah. Daniel, I read your article in Jacobin, and the title of the article for the chat, if people don't know in the audience, is Barack Obama, Don't Trust the Process. The Barack Obama Memoir, Don't Trust the Process. And one of the things that I appreciated in your piece is that you very early on illustrate that the Obama administration are very, very vested in trying to protect the legacy of this president in the face of the rise of Trump after Obama's election. And one of the conversations I wanted to have with you, more than just a question answer, because as someone who has been writing Black Agenda Report for over a decade, and who's met my mentor and good friend, Bruce Dixon, was one of the initial very small coterie of Black left activists and writers like Adolph Reed Jr., who saw what Obama was early on and basically dedicated the time of his presidency to expose that he was a neoliberal Trojan horse in blackface. And pretty much was.
Uh-oh. Deep State got Pascal. He has been taken by the Deep State.
They always do.
If you, Pascal, the Deep State paused you. So you got to go ahead and re-say that.
I said, yes. Yeah, so he was basically a creation of finance capital and the foundation world. What I'd like you to elaborate on is what exactly does his book tell you in terms of his attempt to recast his presidency, and why do you think that project is so important to the liberal establishment?
It's a really important question. So I think the reason that the liberal establishment lost their mind when Trump won was that it basically proved what is essentially their Whiggish version of history incorrect. The idea that sort of history bends toward progress and that Obama was a part of this progress and that they themselves are contributing toward progress. The disaffection, the incredible disaffection that led to Trump, the hopelessness, ironically, Obama, of course, campaigned on a platform of hope and change. The hopelessness that led to Trump really was a prime repudiation of everything that they said that they were doing, that they couldn't make large leaps, because if you did that, you would get, a reaction, and America is a conservative country. So you need to have these sorts of jimmy together things like Obamacare, or you can't really reduce the empire. You've got to invade Libya. You've got to continue to have troops in Afghanistan and all of those things. So I think what they're trying to do is essentially frame the Obama presidency not as a failure. And it's very difficult to do because pretty much in every regard, from the perspective of 2021, it really was a failure. Inequality increased, the wars continued, the American empire continued, Obamacare's, it's an improvement, but not a particularly revolutionary one. So they really want to save Obama's legacy, and more than that, they want to save liberalism itself. So I think you see an outpouring of memoirs that you've never quite seen before. And then I'll just say one final thing, and then I'll stop. And it's also, I think, a reflective of the composition of the Obama administration, which is very technocratic and very meritocratic. So what do meritocrats and technocrats do? They write, and so you have this hyper-educated elite that is essentially trying to defend itself and defend the legacy of this presidential administration.
So what's interesting to me, though, is that do you get any inclination of an acknowledgement of errors in the book at all? Or is it just a matter of him saying that, well, we couldn't do anything better, we tried our best and everything is okay, you guys didn't get a public option because it just couldn't work, it wasn't like we couldn't gut it, and we lost the 2010 primaries not because we didn't do any campaigning or that we deflated our base because we basically gave you a Heritage Foundation version of healthcare 2.0, but it was just like the reactionary rights blowback from having a first Black president. How exactly does he try to CYA, if you will, in the way he frames this book?
It's a great question, and I think that the simple answer is that he frames what he does as pragmatic and realistic. These words repeat throughout the memoir. He essentially adopts a circular form. He says that, I, Barack Obama, am a man of the left, and I understand what the left-wing position is, let's say Medicare for all. But then he will say, this is what I wanted. The horizon is Medicare for all. But in the context of the time, mostly the Republican Party, but even some Democrats, I couldn't do it. So what I did was, the best thing, which was, in this instance, Obamacare. And anyone who criticizes me for that is a left-wing lunatic. essentially, who has no understanding of what politics actually is. So that's essentially how he tries to cover his ass, by saying that he was the one who read the moment correctly, and anyone who's criticizing him didn't, in fact, understand the actual political constrictions that were preventing him from achieving what he wanted to. And this is something that you hear today as well, that people, liberals, really continue to defend Obama based on the position of political realism. And that's essentially the liberal argument. It has been for a long time. We can't do what we want to do because that's unrealistic.
What else is so really interesting, though, is that one of the things that I find fascinating about Obama, the kind of 800-pound gorilla in the room that came out of WikiLeaks, that everyone thought was going to be so explosive in terms of targeting Hillary. The most explosive piece of information that came out of WikiLeaks had nothing to do with Hillary. It was the demonstration from the emails that Barack Obama's whole first term cabinet was picked by a Citibank executive who was, I believe, Michael Froman, who was his Harvard Law School buddy, who I like to call Obama's kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi, if you will, who knew Obama since they were in law school at Harvard Law Review, introduces Obama to Robert Rubin's son early on, gets him tied into the neoliberal consensus, helps him work his way in Chicago politics. So what we have to realize early that this guy was being he was interfacing with ruling class financial services elites very, very early on, and that the patina of left or liberal or progressivism that he campaigned on was pretty much a charade. Would you agree, or you think I'm exaggerating with my description?
No, I don't think you're exaggerating. And I just have to call out, I think, one of the greatest essays written of all time. The Adolph Reed 96 essay on Obama is incredible. I think it might be the best political call of all time. It's 12 years ahead of what, the Obama presidency, and he really gets it right there. But I think that's exactly right. But I also want to stress, I went back and actually read a lot of the Obama speeches with regards to foreign policy. So I'll just speak to foreign policy, which is what I know best here, is that he's left kind of, but he's not liberal. So for example, in the famous speech that makes him the Chicago anti-Iraq war speech in the late 2002 or very early 2003, before the March 2003 invasion, he's like, I'm against Iraq because it's a dumb war, but I'm for smart wars like Afghanistan, and I'm basically, he says that he's in favor of American hegemony and keeping the empire going. So I think some of that was lost in the anti-war fervor of the late, 2007, 2008 campaign. But he's not pretending to be a revolutionary, but there is a patina of outsiderness, outside of the systemness, that he very much campaigned on. And he was, and I think he did that because of his own racial identity, right? He basically identified that as the example, like his very being demonstrated progress. And I think this is critical to understanding Obama as a person, someone who I've spent probably far too much time talking about, that he identifies his personal success with the progressiveness of the American nation. So the very fact of his success is the demonstration to him of the progressiveness of the American project. So it's a catch-22, because if Obama does something, it's progressive, because Obama is only able to do something like that because the American nation allowed a black man like himself to reach this position. And he says that, I think, in all of his memoirs. And it's a very big theme throughout the most recent book, which is the one that's going to be really read by people. This is the legacy book. Dreams of My Father and The Audacity of Hope are not really quite of the same caliber. So this is his final message, and that's, he identifies his personal progress with the progress of the nation.
Gene, do you have any statement you want to make?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that's extremely interesting observations, almost like le stat et moi, like I am America, America is me. But what I wanted to ask you was if you could perhaps elaborate on. So when we talk about Obama's foreign policy, would it be correct to say that his position, especially even in 2007, 2008, was not a critique of empire, even in the sort of most tepid terms, but rather a question of imperial management and a reaction against the type of imperial management that had been undertaken by the Bush administration, and in many ways a kind of call back to the golden age of American hegemony, the 90s, and sort of the high point of liberal interventionism and U.S. U.S. Prestige around the world. Is he in a sense seeking to return back to the 90s after what many liberals see as the aberration of the Bush administration in terms of its foreign policy?
I think it's a really important question because Obama is never quite explicitly restorationist. He's never like, Bush fucked it up, we need to go back to the 90s. What he's essentially saying is that everyone knows that the world needs a leader, and everyone knows that the United States needs to be a leader. And anyone who argues that is either a liar, a coward, or an idiot. And this comes through most clearly when he's talking about the leaders of the global South. And he says something along the lines, I believe I quoted in the article, or maybe it didn't make the final draft, but he says something along the lines of, no matter how much all of these global South leaders carped about U.S. imperialism and U.S. hegemony, when it came down to it, they wanted us there. They knew that we needed to be there. And if we weren't there, the world would devolve into chaos. And so I think Obama is very much a realist in the international relations sense. And if I'm correct, and I think I am, he was actually an international relations major at Columbia University in college. So it's not surprising. But he essentially believes that the world needs a hegemonic leader. That it's the natural push of international politics is to do that, which is the very IR theory way to approach things. And that he thinks the United States is the best leader. And why is the United States the best leader? Because a person like Barack Obama could become president. And this is the best that the world could hope for. And so I think this cannot be overestimated. His very being is itself a justification. His very being as president is itself a justification for the empire. And that's his logic for it, really. And one thing I want to say, one more thing, is that it's kind of disappointing because I thought Obama would be like more of an intellectual, a little more reflective, but there's not really much more to it than that. He's not like offering sort of these like very thought through understandings of what international relations is. He essentially takes it that these assumptions are correct, and if you agree with him, you're a coward, a liar, or an idiot.
Well, he's at a functional level. Barack Obama is a professional managerial class careerist. He's a petit bourgeois, black careerist who basically is not rooted in any kind of oppositional politics. So his whole framing is going to be like, this is how the system works. This is how it's going to be. So I went to law school right across the river from Harvard, so I know how most of those folks tend to look at the world. And the reality of the fact is, though, is that the Obama project was something that was curated and manufactured early on. And that one of the things that Adolph Reed talks about very much so, and he's mentioned to me as well, is that Obama believes that the greatest gift to America that he gave America was himself. In other words, that he's profoundly narcissistic and he's overimpressed with himself in terms of the importance that he represents, and doesn't realize that basically he's just a manufactured tool who was put in a place to protect the transition of capital into the 21st century with a charade of racial kinship to the black struggle that he has no organic connection to, and pimping out civil rights legacies to validate a neoliberal project.
Well, do you remember?
Do you think I'm wrong?
Do you remember when there was a lot of pushback from Cornel West? And I know this was when a lot of people started to throw Cornel West definitely under a bus. When I think it's his second term, he uses Martin Luther King's Bible to swear in on during that second election. And I remember very vividly Cornel West and Tavis Smiley pushing back on that extremely hard, and them catching hell definitely in certain black spaces for that. Do you guys all remember that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we got Black Agenda Report guy was getting Bruce and Glenn were totally outcasts from even people who were on the black left. All the friends of theirs that were liberal, like, no, I mean, let's understand something. The notion that the first black president was Henry Louis Gates wrote an article, I think it was in Time Magazine, and I have a quote from the article in a piece I wrote, and it's in the Huffington Post, called "The Politics of Redemption." I've mentioned that piece a lot, where he said that Obama will not only redeem African Americans, but he will redeem America from its 400-year legacy.
Well, I remember, I think I was in Iraq when this happened, but there was that shooting in Georgia, and Obama sung Amazing Grace. And on Rachel Maddow's show, they like paused it and she was like, I think we all have to listen to this extremely important moment in US history, which really kind of speaks to the kabuki theater that liberal politics became under the Obama administration and how everything became symbolism. And I think, and I hadn't thought of it in this terms, Daniel, but I think very much Obama, it seems that, you know, Obama is at the center of this kind of, he sees himself as this figure who redeems America by his very being, which I find both frightening and fascinating. But one thing I wanted to ask you about particularly is, in what way did this kind of arrogance, and it does come off as, you know, arrogance, there's no other way to put it, in what way did that shape his approach to global affairs in the post-Bush era? And in a sense, you know, the kind of disastrous way, you know, I mean, I think we can talk, and I think you mentioned in your article, there are successes to Obama's policy, sort of relieving, you know, tensions with Cuba, and also, you know, the Iran nuclear deal can be seen as another success. But the fact of Obama's sort of trust in the process ultimately meant that even those modest gains were easily reversed in the post-Obama era. So in what sense do you see Obama's sort of foreign policy being sort of shaped by his arrogance and ultimately being a failure, even in its own terms, as in trying to create a better managed empire and a smarter foreign policy?
Well, I think the existence of himself demonstrated to him that the empire was ultimately a good thing, because I think it's important to remember about Obama is that he's one of the few presidents after 1945. This is less true earlier, but after 1945 to like have genuine experience abroad. His mother, interestingly enough, was an MA in anthropology from the University of Hawaii, and she was spent a lot of her career, I want to say most, but I'm not exactly sure, working for private development groups. She's actually like quite a innovator, if you want to use that language. Is that she's one of the first people in the 1960s to work for private development corporations, which is an industry that really only took off in the 60s and goes strongly today. So she and a young Barack go to Indonesia, I believe in 1966 or 1967, which is, of course, right in the wake of the U.S. At least aided genocide, particularly in this instance of left-wing people, right? Of course, the Indonesian genocide of, I believe, 65, 66, gets going in 64. But anyway, so Obama is literally in a nation that experienced a genocide as a young person, goes up there, goes to school there, and is a young child there. So he actually does have a knowledge of the global South, and he winds up sort of like using that knowledge against itself, where he uses that sort of experience, or his experiences as a black person, to basically, I think, give a little bit of progressive patina to the normal operations of the American empire, because no structural changes are made, zero structural change. I think you could say, like, the big Obama, the theme of his presidency is that in healthcare and the economy and foreign policy, you get tactical changes, but not really structural changes. And I think that holds true as well. And I think, again, it's this incredible arrogance that the world has rewarded, right? Obama's not a narcissist sitting in a basement. Like, the world has been telling him, really, since he went to Harvard, that he's a genius and that he's destined for great things. So it allows him to sort of, in a moment when it's pretty clear that the American empire at least needs to be rethought, it allows him to not do that rethinking.
Well, there's something very important also about that, and I'd like to really elaborate on the racial component in terms of his utility to the ruling class. Is that one of the most important things about Obama's presidency that is often rarely or wax often neglected and rarely discussed is how his racial narrative creates the perfect smokescreen for the militarization of Africa that transpires under his presidency, that if normally had occurred with a white president, probably would have caused some level of blowback or uproar in segments of the black community, particularly those who consider themselves Pan-Africanism. Many people forget that he sent American troops into 33 different African countries at one time. Even though AFRICOM started with Bush, it was only in its developmental stages, and it explodes under Obama's presidency. And he basically puts the American military footprint on the African continent much deeper than it had ever been before, pretty much in the history of the post-World War II era. So to the larger point about the functionality and utility of Barack Obama basically being a president whose whole term, his whole cabinet, is picked by one of the worst offenders of the fraud of the 2008 crash, which is Citibank, being a complete acolyte of Robert Rubin, the man whose own policies caused the crash through deregulation, that we have to understand that this guy was basically a plant to keep the neoliberal project and carry it into the 21st century as a protection of the same financial services companies and industries that crashed the economy, and also use that racial narrative to create a smokescreen to give a kind of hope and change, my black president can play basketball type of joy, happy, happy to American imperialism. I'd like to hear any of that.
And I think I think that's correct. And I think that you see, at the end of Obama's term, U.S. Special Forces are in something like 3/4 of the world's countries, and I wanted to give a statistic. Since the Cold War, the United States, I think, has intervened around 500 times since 1776, and something like 25 or 30%, or maybe I forget the exact statistic, but an incredibly high number has been since the Cold War. And a lot of that was under Obama. So he's just continuing this sort of end of history consensus, the belief that you could do liberal tweaks and that things will turn out all right. And of course they don't. You get Trump. And this is, the great thing that all the Obama knots are trying to explain.
I have a question, Daniel. In terms of Obama's sort of liberal internationalism, or and his sort of perspective on global affairs, to what extent do you think it is more delusional, for example, than the Trump America First style of foreign policy? I mean, I'm not advocating America First foreign policy, but there is a kind of reality to it, and you mention it in your article. Trump said some things that everybody knows. We got some killers in America and things like that. To what extent is that ideological sort of delusion of the liberal wing of the American foreign policy establishment, in fact, more dangerous in the execution of foreign policy than, for example, a United States, which is like America first, and we only care about our interests, which is something which we might not like, but for other countries, that's understandable if you have a transactional relationship. Whereas sort of Obama's sort of idealism, in a sense, is more delusional and therefore more dangerous.
Those are great questions. I just want to clarify, since the Cold War ended, 25% of all U.S. interventions since 1776 have occurred. That is an extraordinary statistic. It's asymptotic. I just wanted to clarify that. I just looked it up. And to your question, I think Obama is actually interesting about in a number of ways. So I do think the imperial hegemony thing, 100%, like every president since 1945, the U.S. will govern the world, come hell or high water, no matter what. But there's actually a shift in his administration. I think his first term, which culminates, of course, with the Libyan intervention, could be more accurately described as like genuinely liberal internationalists. The second term is a little bit more realist, even though there's interventions in Syria, right? There's weapons and shipments being happening, particularly in the second term, and the Saudis in Yemen, but there's no like explosive military event like the overthrow of Gaddafi. right? And that was really justified through a liberal interventionist lens. So this is a question that I think a lot of us on the left often get, which is something along the lines of, don't you want to save babies? If babies are being murdered always in the global south, don't you want to use the American military to save babies, right? And this is the question that Obama poses, and Samantha Power, who was on the NSC in Obama's first term and then became ambassadors to the UN in his second term, and is now something at the State Department, whether she's confirmed she's going to be something high up in the State Department. And there's a fundamental, I see, problem in the liberal internationalist worldview, which posits that U.S. power is the key to global peace and prosperity. Which is that if you accept that the empire has done bad things, like Power accepts, she wrote a book about it called The Problem from Hell, and that Obama, right? He says, I was in Indonesia. I understand that the U.S. empire does bad things, but that we could also use our forces for good. I think that's just a fundamental problem, because if you have the weapons to save babies, that means you have the weapons to dominate the world. And if anything has been demonstrated since 1945 is that the United States and U.S. policymakers are going to dominate the world. So there's a fundamental challenge there. The saving of the innocents comes along with an imperial hegemony that everyone admits causes untold harm.
Well, so, the saving babies garbage is a complete canard, because the question is never asked, what policies did the United States and foreign and international colonial powers implement in those countries to put those babies in harm in the first place?
Right, and there's never any talk of north-south redistribution. There's never any talk of anything. So I think that is what I meant by saying that Obama is just like any imperial leader, American imperial leader, and everything that comes along with that. So I think the liberal internationalist worldview is just fundamentally naive. It's not been proved historically, and there's that tension at the bottom of it, which I think is unovercomable. So then the question then becomes, what does that mean? What does left-wing internationalism mean? Then, if one was to give that content, right? And then my people who are on with me might disagree with me, but I don't think the working class revolution is around the corner. And I don't think that there's a transnational working class that is ever going to be meaningfully activated, at least, let's say, in the next 5 years. It is hard to, draw. I hope the world proves me wrong. So what does a left-wing internationalism mean if someone like Bernie Sanders won the presidency? Right?
That was my next question, is what would a, and this is, I think, something that we've talked about before. It's all well and good to, talk about proletarian solidarity, but, most people in America, and I think Pascal would agree with this, whatever they're posturing at, their political horizons are fundamentally Sanders Corbynism. That's as far as we might talk on the social democratic left. Of course, there are leftists who are even further left. But the question comes when we have these social democrats in America who are like, we have an idea of what we want. We want Medicare for all. We want free college. But then when it comes to foreign policy, suddenly everyone is either a liberal internationalist or they're like, Trotsky. So, what would a structural change do? How would we dismantle the empire?
Well, I want to interject here, and I want to explain. This is exactly why I did not support Bernie Sanders in 2016, because I knew that his socialism ended at the water's edge, and it was a charade, because there was nothing about American empire that Bernie Sanders was really interested in challenging, and that if he did become president, first of all, you will not become president of the United States. I don't care how many socialisms, I don't care how many sickles and hammers you have in flags you have in your house. You will not become American president unless you are prepared to protect the exegesis of American empire and militarism. Period. Point blank. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think it'd be very difficult for anyone to win and say that they're going to dismantle the empire tomorrow. I think there would be no way that they would ever win a Democratic primary, either from the leadership of the Democratic the DNC or from Democratic primary voters. So I'm just talking right now within that horizon of Bernie Sanders being the one who was most likely in my lifetime, and since Eugene Debs, to be on what I would consider the genuine left to win the presidency. The only chance, and just to be cards on the table, I was one of his team of foreign policy advisors. So these were questions that I was concerned with, and I would say I was on the lefter end of that team. And I don't think anyone would say that that's a mischaracterization. So just to return to Gene's point, and then Pascal, we could talk more about what you're saying, because I think it's really important too. I mean, what I was recommending was task forces, frankly. Like, the left has been out of power for so long, and the accretion of the institutions of American empire have gone for so long. And I personally don't, in my materialist reading of history, I don't think that there's a genuine transnational working class conscious in and of itself that would be able to, be the subject object of history and move, Aufhebung, do the transition. So then that's my perspective. I might be wrong. So then we're dealing with basically the machinery of state. And I recommended a lot of task forces, like who's getting paid what, where are troops exactly deployed, how many bases do we have, and where are they? What could be closed tomorrow without pissing off all the various Democratic Party constituencies that don't want to close any bases and that don't want to close any weapons manufacturers, for example, in Massachusetts, which still produces a lot of weapons. So what I was trying to do was essentially to, use old union language, was create a power map, because that's the level I think we're at, to be honest. And we're at a very, in terms of manipulating the levers of policy, should someone vaguely win the presidency, I think we're at a very basic level, and we just need to figure out how things operate.
Well, I'm sorry, Daniel. Are you still there?
No. I please go.
I have a question, a super chat question from Jeremy. Thank you very much, brother. Can y'all talk about the diehard Obama fandom from lib types because of how he enables the narcissism of post-war professional / educated liberalism? Do you want to take that, Daniel?
I could take that really quickly. I mean, Obama is the biggest proof to white liberals that they're good people. I mean, that their system created a Barack Obama, this hyper charismatic, hyper intelligent, hyper, powerful person. And I think it's proof of concept to them. And this is why Trump fucked with them so much, because how could you get the exact opposite proof of concept right after the system had, reached its apotheosis? So I think that it allows them to flatter themselves in every way that one could possibly imagine, of course, without redistributing anything.
Pascal, do you want to add on to that?
I mean, I think that there's a particular importance of the Obama presidency that question doesn't really address, and that we've seen the value of what Obama represents. Excuse me. And we talked about that on the show that we had with Ben Dixon, in that with the demographic realities of the United States, the quote unquote browning of America, with the rise of a kind of lean-in feminism, the increased number of rights given to gays, and so on and so forth, that the type of narrow identity politics that Obama represents, the type of identity politics where you basically have Black, brown, gay, feminist, Mexican, Latino, transgender, woman, X, become the new driver of the Death Star, under the argument of, oh, isn't it, look how wonderful this country is. We have the first woman, we have the first gay, we have the first Latino, we have the first transgender, we have the first Black, we have the first Black, gay, woman, male, transgender woman, whatever, et cetera, so on and so forth. That is the last card that the Democrats have. And they play that card as much as they can. Buttigieg was a trial balloon for that card. Andrew Yang may be considered a trial balloon for that card. Kamala Harris is a female gendered version of that card. And as long as people are sucked into that particular vapid type of identity reductionism, then that card might work, but it's not going to work in a country where there's increased precarity caused by labor displacement and a particular resentment from large segments of American society that they're being displaced and they cannot find functionality in capitalism. And that's part of the reason why we get Trump. And what I'm saying and what I believe is that not necessarily right after Biden, maybe right after Biden, but very soon, we're going to see such a right-wing blowback from this kind of liberal, identitarian-based pseudo-politics that something worse than Trump is going to come along real soon.
I think that's a real possibility, and maybe I'm wrong here, but what I'm beginning to understand is that the precarity that you're highlighting, which I agree is foundational to to any experience of being an American in 2021. And it's weird. You see it kind of like across the class spectrum. To me, it doesn't seem like it's experienced in like a classed way. Like the language or framework of class is so weak in this country that people don't experience precarity as a class phenomenon. Objectively, they do. It's obviously a class phenomenon, but subjectively, they don't read it as such. And so this is why I think so much of these energies are channeled into like the worst elements of the right wing. And I mean, I find myself kind of despairing. I just don't know how to, make a wide swath of people, and this is, I guess, the left's always problem, experience their reality as a classed reality, as opposed to something else of failure or of decrepitude or of isolation and alienation, and not sort of the organizing quality of class. I'm becoming just to be honest, increasingly despairing about that.
And well, considering you're wearing the Adidas tracksuit in honor of Michael, I think that's why Michael Brooks was such an important individual on the left, because he could actually communicate to that particular issue. Because I agree with you. People may live in terrible conditions. People may have great insecurities, but as Pascal often says, the political energy seems to be on the political right. And, liberals seem incapable of comprehending that, the kind of symbolic identity politics that they're so often engaging in is ultimately not winning people. We saw Trump doing better with minorities, especially men, because, the issue isn't just about racism. It's about masculinity. There's a whole host of issues facing American society today that cannot be reduced to pure sort of racial symbolism, but break down on a number of different axes. And I think, I think sometimes I despair that we are not able to communicate that kind. We're often very weak at communicating the kind of class experience that people have, because people experience as individual alienation, personal failures, and all those kind of issues. And I think
it's actually one of the main reasons that that Americans don't see themselves in a kind of context of class is, number one, the ideological superstructure of America based on the concept of quote unquote capitalist realism makes the poor not realize that they're poor, but see themselves as aspirational millionaires. That's one of the problems. Number two, the racial balkanization of American society views people as some kind of overall victim of their particular racial or ethnic background or gender background, which is not completely untrue. There's a lot of truth to that, but the problem is that part of the problem with the left is that some of us believe that any understanding of the way in which race or gender are used in capitalism in terms of foisting this political economy in a particular way is a form of identity politics. I don't see that as a form. I don't see saying that capitalism renders black labor to the reserve army of labor as identity politics. That's materialism. But the thing is, though, because we've been so confused with the rise of people like Obama, Kamala Harris, Buttigieg, Andrew Yang, that we manifest this kind of neoliberal identity politics as being the type of identity politics that represents everything, whenever someone who is disproportionately adversely affected by the way in which capitalism works explains that, listen, there is a materialist reason why I write and talk about black politics, because there's a materialist way in which American capitalism utilizes black people to render them to the dustbin in this country. And what we have to realize is that when people ask, and Janice Graham asked the very question, who is the left? And I say this all the time. People can get offended. I don't care. There is no left in America. We have leftists in America, but there is no left. You're not going to tell me that because of Bernie Sanders and Occupy, that in 6 years, all of a sudden, poof, there's a left in America. That's a load of crap. What we have is a bunch of college-educated people who have been displaced because of capitalism, who, if not for the 2008 crash, will be looking at their bond trading rates, are basically now what is called a left. And a lot of leftover people from the 60s and 70s, like my editors of Black Agenda Report, who are still trying to put down the good fight.
I couldn't agree with that more. This is actually something that's really interesting to me. Like, I always ask myself, why doesn't Biden just buy off those people? They're so cheap. They would go in a second. if you just paid off their student loans and gave them the ability to buy a house, and I'm actually worried that's what's actually happening, is that, the Dems are like, we need to buy off these people. Things are getting a little too hairy. But Pascal, I completely agree. One thing that I would add is that America is also unique because there was so much land, and land served as a kind of like as escape steam valve for a lot of consciousness. So I think that history is so embedded that it's very difficult to get people to read. Like it's so embedded in the, go west, young man. All of these things. There's always you could go. And then after 1898, really after 1945, you could go abroad. You could dominate the world. And it's clear that that's not happening for a variety of reasons. Capitalism's crises, also the rise of China, things along those lines. So that dream is coming to an end. So people are coming home and there's nowhere to put the energy. But because of that history, we don't experience lives class. So there's a lot of like apathy, and what you're exactly right. What you have is essentially a bunch of proletarianizing bourgeoisie, or really early bourgeoisie. The professional managerial class occupies a very particular place in the class structure, but you basically have a proletarianizing managerial class that is now freaked out and who are now going to the left. And I'm worried that they're going to be able to be bought off relatively quickly.
But it's amazing, like you said, it's amazing that if they just paid off those student loans, they would have voters for the rest of their lives.
I think they might actually do it because they're something like that. They need those people. They need them. It's the whole.
But this is the question I have since we're running low on time. It's like, both on the domestic and the foreign policy agenda, where is Biden in this? Biden is the ultimate Obama legacy, right? He was the only reason Joe Biden is president is because he was Barack Obama's vice president. There is no other. The man is, the man is not all there, and he's not particularly even in Joe Biden terms. He's not in his top game. So where do you think it's going, Daniel?
I think this is, first of all, let's all, as people who are at least trying to posture on the left, let's put up the vomit emoji about how tired we are of people saying that Joe Biden is the new FDR, because that is the most ridiculous. Joe Biden is responding to a crisis of capitalism, and one of the reasons why Biden is responding in this way is that we are in a position in America where literally large numbers of Black people who are younger, under 45, and large numbers of white youth who are generally younger, under 45, have realized that the Democratic Party has implemented policies in the last 50 years of the counter-revolution that actually, in a material way, affected both of those communities worse than Republicans. NAFTA, GATT, mass incarceration, welfare cutting, et cetera, et cetera. And that reality wreaks terror in the minds of liberals and neoliberals. And what they have realized with the rise of Trump, which terrified them and shook them up, is that Biden has to give off a patina of liberalism. So his infrastructure bill, the massive COVID bill, et cetera, so on and so forth, is a demonstration that the political crisis of the legitimacy of the liberal left flank of capital is so great that they're scrambling to try to make themselves progressive. And that's why the chattering class of the left flank of capital in the ruling class is trying to paint Joe Biden as an in-between between Karl Marx and FDR. And it's
that's the perfect answer.
You're going to tell me that Joe Biden is not the furthest left president you've ever seen, in this new stimulus package that he put forth with his infrastructure project is not the greatest thing we've seen since dams and freeways were built in the 40s?
Sadly, it's the greatest thing we've seen in the 50-year counter-revolution, but the 50-year counter-revolution was based on grounding Americans to powder for neoliberal capitalism and technology and all other things.
And it's remarkable how piecemeal these programs are. They're big programs compared to what we've seen under previous administrations. And I think, as Pascal pointed out, the issue has often been Democrats have initiated policies that have been damaging to the working class. All Republicans do is just exacerbate problems that the Democrats have made. But even in this fundamental crisis of COVID, and basically in this COVID crisis, the horizon of Biden's so-called New Dealism is like, let's fix the roads and chuck a little bit. We can't even get Medicare for all after one of the worst pandemics in a century. And if this crisis can't do it, God knows what kind of crisis it would take to really force the Democratic Party in even a kind of moderate Keynesian way. I mean, at least it's a little better than we might have expected, but, crumbs from the table at the very least, and in a response to a crisis which no one could have predicted. Had there been no COVID, well, if Joe Biden had been elected in the first place, what would we have seen? Would we have seen just more of the old Obama legacy, an attempt to sort of memory hold the Trump administration? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think, I would say that FDR was also saving capitalism. I know this become a bit
of course he was. He said it himself. And he was saving it because when we had a left in America made up of all people, Jamil Bowie in the New York Times wrote an article about this, that FDR was FDR because of the communist socialists, many of whom were black, that were so willing to burn this country down that he realized he had to make the concessions to implement the New Deal. We don't have a left like that in America today at all.
We have PlayStation, and we have the internet. We have PlayStation, the internet, Twitch. We have a lot of political energy getting.
Cheap food, cheap drugs. Drugs are becoming legal. I know we don't like talking about that, but I think that's related too. And I would also just add that what I see, and just so historically, I think social democratic reforms from public housing to the interstate highway system to whatever, we've got in this country have always been linked to American militarism. And I think you're starting to see some of that with the new Cold War with China. My guess is that that's going to be used by liberals in the Democratic Party to gin up support for like vaguely social democratic reforms. That would be my prediction for the next 4 or 5 years. You are going to get reforms, some domestically, and it's going to be justified a lot in terms of national security. I think foreign policy will remain exactly the same. Biden's an imperial manager. Maybe you'll get a few base closures and things along those lines. You'll get the retreat from Afghanistan. Of course, there'll still be tons of contractors there, but the general strategic posture is going to remain as it's remained since 1945.
Janice Graham says, don't forget voting rights. Well, voting rights are definitely, quote unquote, being challenged. Why? Because Biden won. If Trump had won the presidency, would anybody talking about changing voting laws in this country? Of course not. So the Republicans are basically pissed off because their boy didn't get in, and now they're trying to come up with all kinds of legislative schemes to try to challenge the democratic process. But no one should be surprised that the Republicans play hardball. I mean, they play dirty pool and dirty hardball. The Democrats only play hardball with people that want them to work in a progressive fashion.
And I think Daniel raised a really important point, especially from the historian perspective. When we go back to other periods in the history of capitalism where we've seen sort of accelerating income inequality, the rise of like very small capitalist oligarchical elites. And this was something Pascal raised on Ben Burgess' show yesterday when he talked about, many of the old ideas from the early 19th century are being, early 20th century are being recycled today, just with, a little bit of paint and varnish on them. I think one of the critical differences, and I don't know if we talk about this enough on the left, is that in the, early 20th century and even up to the New Deal era, when the economy crashed, people starved. The key difference today is, and Daniel hinted at this, was we have cheap consumer goods. And I think we cannot underestimate the power of these cheap consumer goods that, even the poor can purchase like food that makes them overweight today in sort of diffusing potential social unrest in the country, not resolving any issues, but pacifying the population. Because, when you're 6-7 stone overweight because you've just been eating Twinkies and Burger King all the time, you're not going to go out there and protest.
Yeah,
well, I think there's another factor we have to realize. There's been a 40% increase in violent crime in this country. The precarity of the current economic system has increased, crime because of the COVID situation, as well as allegedly police are pulling back because of the politics of what's been going on with police killings and the quote unquote way in which they're being demoralized. Whether or not we actually want to give them that quote excuses and reasons as to why crime is going up. But I actually think that when it's not out of the blue, quite frankly, as much as we've had this anti-carceral state discourse for the last 8 to 10 years, that in the coming precarity, whether automation, robots are a factor, we may see a new type of mass incarceration that may not be built on prisons. It may be built on,
Let's stop right there, because we're going to lead in that in the next hour. I know Brother Bessner has to head out. Before we go, we were talking about Barack Obama, and there seems to be a fan of him in the chat. We all know him as a bit of a troll on this show. His name is Tapwater. He says, I can't hate the first black man who kept it tight and held it down despite the odds. I don't know what 8 years. Let me finish reading.
Calm down.
I don't know what 8 years was going to fix 400 plus 4 years of opposition.
You mean the first black man who let 50% of black wealth evaporate and didn't lift a finger?
Well,
gutted historically black colleges, had them lose their bond rating. That black president?
Well, he doesn't see that, and he says that black people are the most progressive people in America, and black people.
Are you trying to trigger Pascal? Are you trying to trigger him? Are you trying to enrage him? Bringing tap water into the conversation.
Daniel, thank you very much. There is a link to Daniel's book in the description of the show, wherever you're watching it. Please pick it up.
Zero coming soon, right?
Yes.
When is that coming out, Dean?
It's going to be coming out when it'll be coming out. Probably in
2022.
2020.
Yeah. Oh, next year.
Okay. And what is it? Imperialist realism.
Yep.
Oh.
So we definitely have to have Daniel back to talk about imperialist realism and
It's
make
your Mark Fisher moment. It's your Mark Fisher moment, Bessner.
Yeah, I'm riffing on Fisher.
Okay.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate being here. I had an awesome time, and thank you. I'd love to come back whenever.
Hey, you said nothing but a word, brother. So thank you very much, and have a good night, man.
Have a great dinner.
Bye, guys.
Peace. And for those of you that haven't done it, please hit the subscribe button. If you're watching this on YouTube, follow us on all the social medias. Pretty, please.
Super chats are available.
We've had a couple super chats in the show.
Whoa. 1 second here. Andrew J. World said that Zero is slow at publishing. Zero is very fast at publishing because, my friend, publishing takes time.
You see, Eli said, Bessner, like, this shit more fun than that Jacobin. Eli, why you think Paul come on?
Well, Jacobin's
I'm playing, Paul.
Hey, but Kuba's coming, right? Kuba's coming for
Kuba's coming for the next hour. So we are going to the show. If you are a patron, you know the deal. I already put the link up for patrons for the after hour segment. We're going to take a deeper dive into what Pascal was talking about with Jean and Kuba. I'm also going to be doing more fun shit, producing the show, moving people around. I'm having a bit of a ball. Super chat. Glad to catch y'all live for once. Hey, Sherwood Mosley, thank you very much. I'm glad you got to catch the show live. I do think the show is a much different experience live because we do interact with the chat, be it with responding to you guys live on the show, but I'm definitely always interacting in the chat. The patron only section, of course, we put the chat on the screen so all the guests can see it and respond to the insanity that you guys say. When we are live, there is always information.
I'll try to bring Domino into the room so people can see. Everybody's always asking about Domino, my dog. So maybe he'll be in the background.
Paul stayed here the whole time. Paul, shout out to Paul. We missed Paul last Saturday. I hope Paul is coming back this weekend. Norman Finkelstein. We got to have the Avengers, the Saturday Avengers crew. X-Men. There's just so many of us. It's like 5 Negroes on Saturdays. A lot of black people. Combined, we have a 700 credit score.
Whatever, man.
All right, Domino. All right. So I'm going to go to the bonus half, and we're going to bring Kuba in. Possibly Summer as well. So we'll have a super packed foreign policy extra half. You ready, Pascal?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. Thank you guys for checking it out. If you're a patron, the link is already up, and we are out.